Hello and welcome everyone to another video conversations on Awaz-e-Haqiqat, which also stands for the voice of truth. I'm your host, Chris Malika Bhadra, and depending on whichever part of the world you're watching us from, as you can already see on my screen, on your screens rather, I'm joined by an amazingly esteemed panel. And the topic that I'm going to discuss about is so somber that it's about the recent suicides that we came to know of in India. Probably these cases are coming up now more as we speak, but the recent demise of Atul Subhash or even Puneet Khurana, who unfortunately had to lose their lives due to abuse from the in-laws, be it financial abuse, economic abuse, you name it. So today's discussion is about raising voice for men in our South Asian diaspora in India. And before I kind of go ahead and formally introduce my guest to all of you, I would like to begin this conversation by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I am coming from. I come from the land of the Kulin Nation, and I would also like to acknowledge the elders, past, present, and emerging. On that note, on my screen, I'm joined by Darshan Monkar. So Darshan is an entrepreneur, author, and a socio-political commentator. His articles have been published in various websites of leading digital news magazines such as The Citizen, National Views, The News Minute, Huffington Post, The Quint, National Herald, among many others. A self-made family man, Darshan lives in Mumbai with his wife and two young sons while trying to balance his time in pursuing his writing and his entrepreneurship at the same time. Welcome, Darshan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next is my very good friend, Sumeher Bajaj. Sumeher is a civil lawyer practicing at various courts in New Delhi for over 17 years now. Having worked in the Delhi High Court for Union of India with the additional Solicitor General of India in the Writ Jurisdiction of the High Court and in policy matters, Sumeher set up a law firm which has a multidisciplinary practice in civil and commercial law. He's also led various important matters at various family courts in Delhi, which include high-profile clients such diplomats and well-known business families, representing both men and women. Sumeher, while practicing family law, has also been advocating for gender equality and social justice. Very good afternoon, Sumeher. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me here, Chris. Always a pleasure.
Tawfiq Ahmed Sheikh is an acclaimed actor, award-winning writer, filmmaker, radio presenter, and community representative for South Asian diaspora in Australia. He's also a corporate finance consultant by day and a think tank dedicated to social cohesion and equity. Tawfiq is a true medium and language agnostic, and his work in broadcasting theatre and film has allowed him to share his passion for storytelling with audiences around the world. Tawfiq is the voice of the Australian South Asian diaspora and emerging artists, and he endeavors to wear this honor with utmost responsibility and care. Very good evening, Tawfiq. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Thank you. Next, I'm joined by Siddiq Panwala, who is the principal solicitor at Unisage Legal, a law firm located in Parramatta, Sydney, Australia. Siddiq has served as treasurer of the Federation of Ethnic Communities Council of Australia, an umbrella body representing all ethnic communities in Australia as well. He's a legal advisor to the Indian Crescent Society of Australia, Vedic Parishad Australia, Auspark Women's Association, and Sohas Charity Australia. Mr. Panwala has also served as the Ethnic Community Council of New South Wales, a state body representing ethnic communities in NSW, as treasurer and assistant secretary, and he's currently a board member. He is a former human rights activist and legal trainer, and has practiced in the High Court of Gujarat in India previously. Good evening, Siddiq. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. And last but not the least, we are joined by Nadeem Ahmed. Nadeem is based in Sydney and stands out as a shining example of what it means to lead with compassion and vision. Recently honored with the New South Wales Government Community Service Award, Nadeem's contributions to the Indian diaspora in Sydney are a true testament to his deep commitment to improving the lives of others. As the founder of the Indians in Sydney, the largest Indian community platform in New South Wales, Nadeem's work has touched the lives of over 135,000 people, and it's only just the beginning, as they say. On that note, very good evening, Nadeem. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for all my panel members for joining me on such a crucial, pivotal, important topic. I would like to start with first things first, right? How does abuse look like for South Asian men in their respective marriages? And Darshan, since you're the first on my screen, I'll start with you.
Actually, I was a bit confused about this particular question. I mean, how does abuse look like for South Asian men? Men is a very, kind of a vague and a generic question, because it will vary from different people differently.
Yeah.
Now, if you're talking about abuse on men being done in the marriage, then it's mostly about mental harassment and financial abuse, which of course, I mean, there are some points which are to be covered in the later on questions.
Yeah.
But just to give you a general perspective, that is where the abuse lies, more than being a physical abuse which a woman has to endure.
Thanks, Darshan. I'll come to Sumer now. Sumer, same question.
You see, Chris, like Darshan said, there is no straight line answer to abuse. Now, let me give you the Indian perspective on what I see, not only from a legal perspective on what my clients complain of and what we see happening in courts, but also generally what we see in society. The first thing that one sees is that when a marriage happens, which is supposed to be a meeting and a union of two souls, and in the Indian culture, almost celebrated, at least for Hindus, it is supposed to be a sacred bond.
Yeah.
The bond is supposed to be guarded by certain protections, which don't even allow a prenup or don't even allow a contract to be signed by the parties which are getting married. And we'll come to on the laws later. We'll come to what the laws stand as and what they are. But the problem with Indian men as a vis-a-vis a marriage and the abuse that they can face is that it is emotional, like Darshan mentioned. It's emotional and it is trauma in society, because a single complaint from a woman would make the man think 100 times about his position in society and life. And you saw what can happen vis-a-vis the media, and you know how media trials are over here. So, I mean, putting it in a blunt way, I'd say that men have a lot of burden to carry because of the past abuse to women, to sort of bring women to the same platform and equality that is actually required in society. Certain laws have been convened and certain laws have been acted upon. And they, in a way, cause trauma to a bona fide man who's actually trying to live their life in all earnestness, because they have to actually walk on eggshells.
Right.
That's how I would put it.
Thanks, Sumer. Thank you. Tawfiq, I'll come to you. You've heard both Sumer and Darshan. What are your views on how does abuse look like for men?
Thank you, Chris. I probably have a one-word answer to that. Abuse for men is invisible. It only gets visible when it's too late. And it generally comes out in form of abusive men. And by no means I'm trying to absolve all men who are physically abusive, but then the way abuse towards men does show generally is either through the likes of cases that we have seen, which has brought this panel together today, and unfortunately aggression to a point that in any form of a way it may classify as illegal or criminal. And we've got lawyers from two different Commonwealth laws, and they both will probably attest to the fact that when it comes to crime, it's very clear, but unfortunately justice is always out.
Right. Thanks, Tawfiq. Siddiq, I'll come to you. You've heard 4 people now. What are your views on abuse for men?
And Chris, for me, I would put it in a very philosophical way. Abuse is abuse.
Okay.
It doesn't distinguish between men and women.
Yeah.
And particularly because we are talking about institute of marriage. So we are focusing on abuse in marriage.
Right.
And in marriage, historically, abuse always done towards the female. And that's true. I think it's historically is true. But with the changing of time and the way society emerge and the way our lifestyle changes, now we are more focusing on men as well. As far as issues concerned, is similar to both gender. Abuse is financial, abuse emotional, abuse in accommodation, abuse access of services, abuse in many forms. It depends on the personal circumstances of individual case. So abuse is abuse in my definition. And how we address the abuse. I am a legal person. We will discuss about what legal remedies available for abuse victim. But in my opinion, abuse is abuse. It doesn't distinguish between men and women.
Thank you, Sibi. Very well put. And Nadeem, I'll come to you now. You've heard everyone. What are your views on this question?
I think most of you, or most of the experts, have actually covered everything. So little bit of thing. For what I believe is that abuse, as Siddiq sir said, abuse is abuse. It is not bound by borders or demographic. What South Asian men, if you're talking about South Asian men, it actually often manifests as a subtle, very suffocating storm. So it's like cultural norms, social expectation, your family. So it is a bit of a unique experience, but it's not. And when we talk about abuse, we often picture it's a physical harm. But it's emotional abuse. It's a lot of us. It's like manipulation. A lot of us, we haven't covered that. Manipulation it's part of an abuse, and it is sometimes I would say made to feel that you are very inadequate, that you can't do this, or you can't do this, you are so weak. So most of the things often go unnoticed, and because men is always expected to be very tough, that he can't cry, and the financial abuse is that that you are the man and you have to earn. I mean, that's what been embedded into our culture, that if you're a man, you have to look after everything, you have to be strong, you can't cry. But it is very heartbreaking because often these men suffer in silence. And as Tawfiq said, by the time it comes out, it's just too late. It's like invisible. It's invisible abuse. But again, abuse is abuse. And I believe it's the right time. Thank you for doing this.
Have to be said. Thanks, Nadeem.
We acknowledge it all it takes on everyone, including the men.
Sorry, Chris, just for technical, will you accept me in the Zoom?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. So
thank you. Very interesting answers, but I'll just be something that has sprung up because a few months ago, I spoke about marital rape, right? About marital rape for women in marriages. And someone came up and told me, why are you always talking about marital rape for women? Men also get raped in marriages. No one addresses that. But when I asked that question to all of you, you mentioned it's abuse, it's emotional, financial, it's invisible. So are we trying to somewhere say that men don't undergo marital rapes, or is it such a low number that it doesn't get reported and acknowledged? What are your views on that? This time I will start with, who do I start with? Nadeem, I'll start with you. Sorry for throwing you under the bus.
No, that's fine. You are absolutely correct. It is a form of an abuse, and it happens quite often actually in the society. I think again, it is not bound by the demographic. It happens everywhere. And again, when we talk about abuse, we are talking about all these things, and we forgot about the sexual part of the abuse, and it happened quite often in the society. Again, the reason people don't come out is, again, there's like a social pressure, cultural pressure, and they have this mentality that it's gonna affect their man image. So most of the thing does not come out.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Nadeem. Sumeher, your thoughts on whether men also get physically abused in marriages? Sumeher, you're muted.
Exactly what Nadeem said. The social stigma for a man to come out and say, you just mentioned marital rape. Now, if a woman ultimately is abusive in bed, or is abusive in a relationship, especially when it's sexual, there is no recourse to a man. In fact, a man would be called out by society and say, "Oh, you are the one at fault. Please go see a doctor. Why are you not in the position to be able to satisfy your spouse?" And that will be absolute stigma coming to a man. So for men to really speak about, and now come to a simple thing like hitting. How many men will actually come out even at the age of, let's say, 15, 16, or 18, where I think the generations below us are way more advanced than us, and they talk about equality? How many boys in college or high school actually come out and say, "Oh, you know what? I got beaten up. Somebody took a bat to me or somebody slapped me," and stuff like that. It'll be considered to be a very silly move by a man amongst his peers to actually talk about it and say, "Oh, I got prevailed over," just because he's being decent, just because he's not going to hit back, and so on and so forth. Now, I don't want to go further into this bit at this moment, but I just want to tell you that there is something called the Domestic Violence Protection of Women Act in India, which doesn't give men any recourse. So apart from them not wanting to report issues where their image in society or at work, even in a day and age, and of course, India is not equal by any chance. But in Australia today, I can say that there is more equality. But even there, how many men, because of the fear of stigma, will come out like Nadeem said? So I want to rest it at that.
True. Thanks, Sumeher. Darshan, I'll come to you. What are your views on this question that I just threw?
Well, the first thing that you asked was, does marital rape happen on men? So honestly, we don't know. We don't know because there are no records. There are no records because one, the Indian law, as far as I understand, which Sumer can probably clarify, the Indian law does not even recognize rape on men. Forget marital rape. So there was only the section 377, which used to be somewhat kind of, taking on rape on men, but even that has been diluted for a very different reason. We'll not get into that. But the normal rape laws defines rape where the victim is a woman. Period. So man cannot be raped in India is the legal perspective that we have. So that is one. So why would we even have records of men getting raped? So forget about having records of men being raped in marriage.
Right.
Second is, as everybody else spoke before said, how many men are actually going to go out and say, "I got raped by a woman"? One, if he goes and talks to this with his friends, is going to get heckled for being a complete ass. Somebody might even go and tell him, "Why didn't you enjoy it?" Somebody's going to go and tell him, "Kya, you are kind of, like a pushover kind of a thing." So I seriously doubt how many men are going to go out and complain about this. So yeah, I'm sure it must be happening, but we don't know. And then coming to the reason of this is what has been already said is the lack of law and the lack of and the apprehension.
Yeah, it's a very sorry state of affairs. What I'm hearing right now. Tawfiq, I'll come to you now. What are your thoughts?
Sure, Chris. Chris, whatever I say, and I mean, taking on from what Darshan just mentioned, that whatever I do say will be a conjecture at best, because we have to form opinions based on what we can know. But the two closest conjectures that I can draw here is, first of all, that a prevalent culture of arranged marriage in India does completely absolve one of the key aspects of marriage, which is a libido mismatch. And that in itself is an alarming situation to consider, that sexual abuse can occur, and of course, it can occur in both genders. However, what happens then is the physical strength, as the society always considers, is always predominant over emotional strength. It is almost unthinkable of a marital rape where a man becomes the victim. And without getting graphic, and I'll rather let that buck come on to Sumesh because he's the lawyer here. But there is a very specific definition in law which qualifies for rape. And unfortunately, in that definition, man cannot be raped at all by a woman, at least. And that unfortunately is the social and the legal paradigm where marital rape towards men being a victim cannot even be discussed because there is no recourse for it.
All right.
But,
Thanks,
yeah.
Yeah, Sumeher.
I'll just jump in here and I would say that they would have to categorize it they would have to say rape is actually abuse and physical abuse, because there'll be no provision to protect men vis-a-vis rape itself, as you guys correctly pointed out. And hence, it will have to be a man complaining that, because for sodomy, we had certain laws. We've had certain laws, and they're all controversial laws which had to be retracted. But there, like one of you just mentioned very clearly, that there is no way for a man to file a case where apart from the fundamentals don't apply.
Yeah.
So the fundamentals of rape does not exist for a man to allege rape, but then it would constitute abuse at least. At least we can coin it down to abuse. Then the question is, that's what we have to discuss later. Do those protections actually exist? Is it actually available to a man to go under the DV Act? Because that act is to protect women. Only some high courts had opined that it is unconstitutional for this to only apply to women because there has to be equality before law. However, there are no cases under the DV Act that I see men are able to file. They're not aware, or nor do they file them. Apart from a few, 4 or 5 celebrated cases that men have been able to file. So to bring it within the IPC under rape, there is absolutely no provision to help them. But even under the Domestic Violence Act, they're unable to put this case up. So I wanted to just clarify that position to you.
Yeah,
To
thanks.
both Darshan and Tawfiq.
Yeah, thank you, Sumeher. And finally, Siddiq, your thoughts on about
very good perspective on a taboo issue. This is basically a taboo. It's difficult to discuss this issue in public platform because of its usual historical and social context. As Sumeher said, similarly in Australian legal context, first I will focus on legal context.
Yeah.
There is no provision in domestic violence for male rape, similar situation. But domestic violence fall into the criminal law of particular state jurisdiction. In Australia, there is a state jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction. Criminal law is a state jurisdiction. But you can have recourse in general criminal law, which is very rare, claimed by the man that he was raped, particularly in marriage institution. Because if you claim this in the marriage, it will definitely, your marriage going to end. That's the first casualty. And this issue will linger on whole of your life. It's not easy to pick, it's similar like a female. So this issue is always a difficult one.
Right.
And I would say even completely different aspect. For male, it's not rape, it's a performance issue. That's what I can see, particularly in the first world country. Look at the pressures, look at the situation. First migrant have to settle down, settlement issue, earning, look after the kids, mortgage. I see it's more of a pressure to perform than this issue. I'm just telling in a joking way, but that's how I see this issue.
Well pointed.
Yeah, thanks. It's more heavier than I thought, because I thought I'll ask this question and maybe there will be a solution. But now it's like I'll have to call you guys for a different conversation altogether on that. But I'll come back to the issue.
You did a surprise test without being asked a question which is also outside syllabus as well. So Chris, just
because I know nothing is out of syllabus for all of you on the panel. So yeah.
Thank you.
Coming back to this unfortunate incident that we all saw when Atul ended his life. You know how these days we are ruled and governed by social media narratives around us. So when I was doing my part of the research, a lot of interviews, a lot of conversation was being held where people were saying that men like Atul or Puneet, they had various other options before they kind of committed or died by suicide, before they took this drastic step. Now, when we talk about when this conversation is being had, that they had other options. Now, I want to know your thoughts on this. How did you perceive the situation? This time, I will start with Tawfiq, since he was not looking at the panel.
Well, I'll actually put something to rest here in terms of what recourses you have. I mean, what options Atul had before getting into it. Um, just look up, and for who do have that moment to look up the case of Surendra Kumar Das, um, an IITian, an IPS officer, committed suicide, and much later got to know that the wife was responsible for the IPS officer's suicide. A person who's so legally informed, who's so informed about law, order, has an authority, has most likely exercised authority as well as leadership throughout his life
Yeah.
in an Indian bureaucratic and a judiciary and a law system, despite of that, fails to stand up to abuse in what the society expects you to do it as, uh, to leave that burden on civilians who, as a society, as I believe one of our panel members had said, we're not groomed in a society where emotional expression is even a part of a man's growth or growing
Yeah.
up, or a grooming for that matter. As a matter of fact, it is looked down upon.
Yeah.
So if someone is bottled up to that point, despite of the fact that someone within that framework where law and order is at arm's length for someone is not able to express, putting that load on a civilian and having those retrospective intelligence applied to somebody is shameful to say the least. I'll let the rest of the panelists speak on this.
Thank you, Taufeeq. Nadeem, your thoughts on that, please. Nadeem, you're muted.
Sorry. It was very sad news when you hear the cases like, Atul, because as you said, people said he had option and everything, but no one actually, it's easy for people to judge from outside because they're not in the shoes. I'm not sure if you read that whole page document in the final letter he wrote to his son. He said, "Don't trust the society. Don't trust the system. Both the system and society will feed you off." But again, that was the perspective, and a lot of people will come in such a way that the Indian laws are more towards feminisms, and the Indian law systems are biased toward women and the wife family. We are not in the position to actually judge what exactly happened there. So I'm talking about the perspective of the person. Um, we as a man, if something is going through, they come back to you, as they say, be strong, be a man, don't let your family down. And that pressure can be very, very suffocating for the person who's not getting a solution. Just suffering in silent every day. So what we need to focus on is not just the option what someone might have at the time, but why they felt like this. And none of these options are viable. It is, as I said, it is easy to judge from outside. Unless we, as people, as a society, we create a culture where a man can feel safe and share the struggle without the fear, and without fear of being judged and being laughed upon, being made fun of. So if we are able to make that culture, we will see betterment of or else we will be keep seeing these heartbreaking outcomes.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Sumeher, your thoughts?
The question itself, did he have any avenues? I asked myself, what avenues? He was facing proceedings that only a woman could have initiated against him, which were under the Domestic Violence Act, which I keep coming to, which is not available to men, except for two judgments where it was applied, and there are contrary views coming from different high courts, whether a man can even go, not against the wife, even against male relatives of the wife, can he go and fight a case. So having said that, there were no avenues because he was not even being able to see his 4-year-old son, Atul Subhash. He was being asked for money. This is what he says. It is obviously everything is alleged here, but they take a dying man's declaration, whether it be a note or a video, to have higher evidentiary value than any other declaration that a person will give. So if we take it on the face of it without me saying if it is correct or not, for somebody to take a step like this, let's say that the two things we must look at. Okay, so there is 113A and 113B of the Indian Evidence Act, which in case of a dowry death, ultimately it comes to a presumption in law that if a woman has died from a dowry death, then, and 113B would say that a male member or family members of the male there'll be a presumption that yes, that is suicide because of the man and the family's constant pressure for dowry.
Right.
So there are presumptions which are drawn in case of women. Those presumptions are not available in cases of men. So special enactments like a 113A or 113B of the Evidence Act, those special provisions and many other for women, do not exist. So this man had no recourse. He was going through proceedings against him where he was battling for the custody of his child. He was unable to see his son. He was being asked, this is what he says, that he was being asked for unrealistic sums. 3 crore rupees were being demanded from him, which he didn't really have. And now this person, where does he go? I asked myself this question as a lawyer. What could he have done? He could have filed applications after applications. In what court? In a court which won't listen to him. A court which would say this is the woman's case. So there was no recourse to him in law. At best, he could have taken it all the way after 12, 14 years to a higher court, tried to vindicate himself. I forget the name of that case where this gentleman had to fight an influential wife who was a writer and also an IIT father's daughter, an IITian, and very close to the member of parliament. That man writes a note to Atul Subhash now, I forget that gentleman's name. And it's a reply to Atul Subhash's testimony.
Right.
And he says, you had no choice. He's applying the law on himself and saying what he had to do. He had to fight for 14 years to ultimately win. And this man, by the time he would have seen his son, the son would have been 18 years old. So where is the recourse? Then the second question comes to me, let's go out of law. The second question comes to me is, are there support groups available to men? In India, hardly any. I mean, there is no active support, at least not a legally backed support group. And even if we go online and we check for support groups, we'll hardly find any. So what were his options? Obviously, his options should not have been to commit suicide. His options were to seek therapy. His option should have been to be able to take the aid of maybe a media channel. But would the media listen to him? That's the question I have in India. Is it juicy enough for the media to hear a man's version of domestic abuse and highlight it? Not really. It only has happened because he left that note and he committed suicide. That's why we're talking about it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been speaking about this entire thing. And then we have Puneet Khurana. I mean, the allegations in Puneet's case are not very direct, and he doesn't really say that it is because of the divorce proceedings, XYZ, but his family comes to say so. So it's, for men, it is always too late. So the only avenues that I see are avenues that we will, as the society now, we will have to build them. We should have foundations going like we have for women. And we should have certain protections given to men under the Domestic Violence Act also, where a protection officer should be appointed in case of a man, if he fears for his life or if he fears something wrong is happening. And strong counseling, at least for children. I did not hear, I couldn't get myself to hear what Atul actually said, because it was, to me, it was really distressing to just hear the whole thing. But just reading articles, there's one on BBC's published, which is excellent, which actually talks about the length of the suffering that he had. So what, for child support, why do we even consider that a single parent, just being a woman, should have a preference to bring up a child? Although the high courts and Supreme Courts today say joint custody, that should be the way. The man also should be allowed to have equal number of days and hours. But in a 4-year-old's case, would he have even gotten to see his son? No. So what were the solutions before? I am asking this question to all of us.
Right. And probably I'll ask this question to our general audience also. What options do you think men have when such a case happens? Darshan, I'll move on to you. Heard three men already. What are your thoughts?
Well, this particular question came from the social media narrative, and most of the social media narratives are not nuanced. So it's like, does he have options? Is a very general question to ask. So yeah, he had a lot of options. He could have continued with the case, like Sumeir said, for the next 18 years. He could have continued paying 40,000 rupees that he was paying per month to his wife. That was around half his salary or something, and the rest of the salary was going into making weekly visits to UP to the court.
Yes.
So yeah, he could have done all that. So is suicide an option that somebody puts on the table? Hey, okay, I've got options like A, B, C, and suicide. So it's not an option that somebody considers. It's just something that you're driven to. It is a last choice that you have when you're out of all options. So when you reach that point, according to me, you are in a state, you're in the mental state where all the options have been exhausted. He must have, banged his head against the court of law. He has seen the judge, who, according to his statement, was completely biased. I'm just taking his statement at face value out here.
Yeah.
He has seen the amount of money that he was shelling out on a monthly basis and the amount of money that was being demanded from him, the harassment that his parents was having. So he did try all the options. I'm sure he must have gone to his friends, he must have gone to somebody whom he knew in the media, got refused, laughed off, and that's where he reached. Now what do I have? Another thing is the way he reached this option. If you guys have heard his video, he wanted to cut off the source of funding. He clearly said that. He said it is stupid that I continue to pay for my own ruin. Or words to that effect, not exactly those words, but words to that effect, that he didn't want to keep on paying his wife so that she can harass his family and himself even more. And that was the whole thing, cutting off the source of money. That was what was going on in his mind. Now imagine his state of mind at that point of time. And then ask the question whether he had any other options.
Thanks, Darshan. Siddiq, I'll come to you. Do you really think he had other options?
Options, very good question. What option? Option to live or option to die? Why Atul committed suicide? It's not an issue. It's already done. He was in such a traumatic circumstances. He couldn't think about himself. Suicide is the last resort for any person who is going through hell in his or her life. So if options we are talking based on the information available from Atul's, from media, from judiciary, which is not the clear picture. What was going in Atul's mind is only Atul's know. So who failed Atul? That's the real issue. First, family failed to Atul. Second, friends and society failed to Atul. And then the third comes the governance system, law and order machinery. This is collective failure. One person death is the outcome of societal failure. As a legal personnel, I will focus on law and order because person goes to the law and order machinery as a last resort. They try with the family, they try with the friends. And when they fail, they go to the legal machinery. And what legal machinery, whether it is Indian subcontinent or in the first world? Yes, we have a bit better system. We are streamlined, we have quicker justice. But the complexity of subcontinent, cultural aspect, religious consideration, family composition, all played in this whole machinery. And this machinery, which is consist of law and order, police, then prosecution, and the judges. All these three are interconnected.
Right.
This machinery, and apart from this machinery, there are some support systems easily available in Australia. But it is difficult for male to avail all the support system in one go. There are a lot of other considerations. So in my opinion, option very context
Right. Thanks, Siddiq.
specific. This is the collective legal and law and order machinery.
Thank you, Siddiq. Thank you. The next question I have specifically for Sumeher and Siddiq. So the question is, what are the factors on which alimony is based, and how does that look like in India and Australia? So Sumeher, if I can please get you to elaborate that issue from an Indian law perspective, and then Siddiq, I'll come to you on how alimony looks like in Australia. Thank you.
Right. Just before I answer that question, I think from Siddiq also what I got is that for a man to ultimately go through the legal process in Australia, if this was Atul's position in Australia, even then he would have very little recourse. That's what I understood over there. So the legal recourse, the optional legal recourse, it doesn't seem to exist for Atul anywhere in the world, is what I understand. But in India, for sure, that he had no option. Now I'm coming to your next question.
Yeah.
As far as before alimony, we need to understand the Indian structure. We need to understand why our law is really protective of women. The alimony, there is no distinction. Alimony under the Hindu Marriage Act, either party can ask for alimony, thankfully. But first, I have to make you understand what really happens practically in a case of a divorce. So in 90% cases, if a woman wants to file a divorce, she doesn't do so. She just goes straight under the Domestic Violence Act. Lawyers in India advise them, instead of taking the route of going to the divorce court and filing a contested divorce under Section 13 or asking for a a settlement sort of a mediation, a pre-litigation mediation, what we call it, they are generally advised to first go to the women's cell or to go to the TV court or do it simultaneously. They're not even told to go to a family court and ask for divorce, because divorce may take 5 years, 7 years, 8 years. So a woman is always asked by a lawyer, in my practical experience, to simply go and file allegations, whatever allegations, because cruelty is a very open-ended book here. Now, what is cruelty? As per the IPC, what we look at 498A, she has to say that I was financially, emotionally, the Domestic Violence Act even says, like financially to the extent saying, oh, he denied you a car. The man himself has a car and a driver, and one day you needed the car and driver to go somewhere. If she is earning money and she has a car and driver to give to herself, but she could say that the man didn't give me his car and driver to go to work that day, and it can constitute to being cruelty, because he's not treated in the same way as he should have treated himself. So what's happened is it's become a mockery of the law. Now, for every case, and before I say this, let me also we have to weigh in and we have to understand why laws protect women in India. We still see thousands of women dying by dowry deaths every year. For the last, I don't think dowry demands have stopped. 90% in a survey we found that 90% of Indian marriages involve a taking from the women. Let's call it dowry or let's call it gifts, let's call it whatever. But it is expected, and in 90% marriages, a woman is always bringing something to a man.
Right.
There are demands made. Women leave their careers. They go into a man's house. There are so many dowry deaths. I think the numbers are still in 20s and 30,000s per year. I think there are 6,000 odd cases which I looked at in a last survey that I was looking at. So we don't have the right numbers because most go unreported. So in rural India, we are still looking at a lot of dowry deaths, and we're still looking at, so the laws were there to protect these women who didn't have a voice, who had to leave everything, and they were treated like cattle, and they were made to do domestic chores, and they were just asked to always help the man, and the man was supposed to be the provider. And now let's go to the cities. I mean, I'm going to rest that there for all of us, because we have to understand why the law was created. And now let's see how the law is abused. So while these laws stay very relevant for backward areas and tier 3 cities and villages, for tier 2 cities and tier 1 cities, you go to a lawyer, you say, as a woman, and you say, you know what, I like to file for divorce. The lawyer is going to tell her, well, it's going to take 5 years, 6 years. Let's fast track this procedure. Let's file domestic violence coupled with the complaint at the police station, please make a history of what all you have suffered in the through the marriage. And you know what a marriage is. It's a compromise, and people, like I said, a simple thing like a driver not being given, it can be blown out of proportion. Then a woman would say, in that case, will say, oh, but that's the kind of lifestyle my husband has, this is the kind of lifestyle I have. And after making a clear distinction and demarcation, if it is found that the husband has used resources towards himself, towards his work, while she may be using her resources towards her work, that can be financial violence, and that could be cruelty. So, and immediately a complaint under 498A, if it is filed before with the women's cell, it is going to, after 3 times of mediation, it is going to be registered. It has to be. That's the mandate. So here we are in a situation where the laws are so lopsided because we wanted to give women protection, and rightly so, that now for any domestic divorce case, we look at domestic violence and a crime against women petition or a complaint going in for every case. There has only been one client I've got so far, a woman in my career, who was an independent doctor. I'm not going to give you more facts than that, and who went ahead and told me that she doesn't want to go down the usual route and file a divorce. And I was so happy to hear that, because they all come prepared to first strong arm their situation, reach a place where the man has absolutely zero sort of play left with law. You're facing an FIR, you can't go abroad, you can't really, there's stigma at work. Then after that, what you're facing is you're at a domestic violence court where there's a protection officer. So everything is lopsided. By the time a divorce is filed, what options do you have?
Right.
That's how the law is used. So I think that understanding is important on how laws stand today and how the misuse happens.
Sure. Thanks, Sumeher. Siddiq, coming to you, how does alimony look like in Australia?
As far as alimony is concerned, after Siddiq answers this, I'll also tell you what alimony works as.
Yeah, I'll come to you. Siddiq.
Yes, before I talk about alimony, I will give some brief information about what family law in Australia, how does it work. In Australia, Family Law Act 1975, it's a federal law, and it's work in all jurisdiction because Australia has states and federation. Most of the criminal law are state law, but immigration and family law are federal law, and it has Australia-wide jurisdiction. So family law basically cover 3 areas: divorce, child custody, and property settlement.
Right.
If there is a domestic violence, it falls into criminal law category, which is the state subjects, and each state has their own jurisdiction. With this introduction, alimony here is called spousal maintenance. Yes, it's available in Australia, and it's almost gender neutral. Any party can claim spousal maintenance, and there are some consideration like how long marriage, second, how is the health of the party, what is the earning capacity of the party, if the child involved, how many children, who is looking after children. There are set guidelines, and if you are unable to maintain financially, yes, you can request the court, and court will allocate amount, keeping some formulas. That's how alimony works in Australia. Another aspect of the spousal maintenance, because Australia is the first world country, here there are better financial support system compared to third world country. You can get support from the Centrelink. You can get support from some other social organizations.
Yes.
If you do not have house to stay, you will get accommodation, temporary accommodation. You will get distress allowance, depend on the state. So there are some support systems available which complement your financial distress.
Okay.
But legally, you are entitled to get spousal maintenance, and both party, irrespective of whether male or female, basically depend on your financial or your earning capacity. And yes, it's not like permanent like in India. Yes, it depends. If you are able to earn, then it might discontinued or circumstances change. Other party can go to the court and it can change the court order.
Right. Thanks, Sadiq.
Pretty much the same.
Similar?
Pretty much, Siddiq. Pretty much the same. And the difference here will be that alimony is looked at as maintenance. Alimony is divided into two parts. There can be different types of alimony, but two parts, which is a monthly alimony and then a permanent alimony. Now, like I said, women normally would not go to a divorce court and ask for alimony because under Section 25 of Hindu Marriage Act or a similar provision under the Special Marriages Act would look at 2-3 facets. As interim alimony, they would first say, how much money do you need to actually have a case going? Like in a case, a woman filing a divorce case, how much money does she need to sustain herself to get a case going? It's a minimal amount which is given by a court.
Yeah.
There are under the CRPC, also under 125 of the CRPC, another action for alimony for maintenance can be filed for a woman who's destitute or finding it difficult to take care of herself. Under the DV Act also, the maintenance can be asked for. All three laws allow the Domestic Violence Act, which women go under to start, the divorce laws under the Hindu Marriage Act or the Special Marriage Act or whatever religion one is from, or 125 of the CRPC. Now, the alimony given at the time of litigation is always very minimal. It is just enough for sustenance. What the court has to balance is, like I said, it's gender neutral, where either party can. Right. However, courts generally weigh in and say it will have to be, they always go in the favor of a woman. And they will always tell a man that, oh, well, you can get a job and you can do this. Of course, courts have to apply the law at the end of it, which is going to be a long battle and a fight. So for alimony, it is going to be based on similar factors: child support. What was the status of the husband at the time of marriage? What is his status now? What are the assets that the husband has built over the years with the support of the wife or during the marriage? Then what would be looked at is her standard of living, pre-marriage and post-marriage. So a husband would be asked to come up and maintain that standard of living for the wife. For example, if she didn't have a car and a driver before the marriage, then the court would say, oh, well, that's what she's used to now, so you must do it. It's a lopsided law because a lady walks into a life. Let's say she comes from, is an independent woman, now gets married to a business family. I'm just giving an example. Then she would have to be given a similar treatment that the business family gave her after the marriage. So that's how alimony is decided. Now that could be paid monthly or it could be permanent. So pretty much of what Siddiq said. And very, very, in India, it's not very common for a man to be able to win alimony from a court of law. Yes. So that shows you the lopsidedness.
Yeah, just one point which Sumer raised, Krish, is child support. Yes, I will give full credit to Australia and the first world. They have very robust child support system. Any women, basically women having child custody or there is a separate system called Child Support Agency. Just one phone call and they will assess you, your suitability and your partner's suitability, and they will decide. They have very, very detailed formula, and based on the formula and income of the other party, they decide amount monthly or basically monthly.
Yeah.
And they can collect that money like police. They are worse than police. They will get money from your personal account if you are not paying. So very good system. I will give full credit for child support.
And Siddiq, I'll just button there. And sorry, this is not my subject to speak, but it is very clear for those who've actually gone through such processes. The law and order is very clear on that when you are actually at the receiving end of it, because you'll find that very clearly mentioned to you. We don't care about you and your divorce. If a child is involved, that child is a priority. I couldn't care less about what happens. But the good thing there with Australia is that there is a financial arrangement or a financial agreement possibility before you get into a marriage, which is more commonly known as prenup, which comes from the US terms anyways. But on a lighter note, the thumb rule here is that whoever's earning more ends up paying the alimony. So if you are getting into a marriage in Australia, just make sure that you're earning lesser than your spouse if divorce is the eventual goal. But yeah, I mean, in terms of supporting marriages, in terms of supporting and it's just tying up with what Sadiq Bhai said as well, we know that if you're not financially in a very good position to get into the housing market, you could be paying a 5% deposit instead of 10 or 20% and still get into it. Single mothers can actually enter housing market at 2%. That's how much the support is in terms of at a federal as well as a state level. So there are very clear evidences that divorces can be less messier but more expensive.
Topic you muted off for the last 10 seconds, but I get your message. And you've raised the point of prenup. I will come back to that later for all the panel to have a chat about. But Ram, thank you, Sumeher and Sadiq. That was a very detailed, transparent description of how alimony looks like, and good to know that it's gender neutral in both parts of the country that we are referring to. All right. So now moving on. I was listening to, or I was reading some research somewhere where it is alleged again that Atul's partner, she never wanted to get married. It was alleged that she got married because her mom kind of forced her to, someone was sick, something happened. Which kind of made me ponder, and hence the question to all of you. In your opinion, is the institution of marriage flawed? This is a simple question, and I would love to know your thoughts. The two men who've been quiet for a while, Nadeem, I'll start with you this time.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
It's a very, very good question. Everyone will have their own, personal perspective. But I wouldn't say it is entirely flawed.
Okay.
But it is deep rooted into a tradition. When you're talking about South Asian community, I'm talking about Indians, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankan, everyone. It is deeply rooted into a tradition which can be sometimes clashed with the modern realities as as we turn into go into the modern world. So, I mean, if you look at the villages, they're a lot different. And if you go to the rural areas and urban areas, same thing applies here as well. When these things clashes with the modern realities, there is a lot of conflicts. In many South Asian family, marriage is not just for two people. It's not, it's about two families, connecting together. And it can lead to a lot of interference, a lot of pressure from both sides, not just like, your parents, your relatives and everyone. And what is we need, I believe, is we need to change this mindset. Marriage should be about the partnership based on the mutual respect and communication, trust, and not about fulfilling the social expectation. So I think that's one of the reasons I believe is cause a lot of distress in the marriage. We also need to normalize seeking help.
Yes.
We need to educate ourselves that help is available, whether it is counseling, therapy, and just open conversation with the family.
Thanks, Nadeem. Darshan, over to you, sir.
Well, from a strictly Indian perspective, kind of a thing, marriage as an institution was flawed before, and it's flawed even now. It has changed to a large extent. I mean, from if you move across from rural India till to the urban sides, there is one part where the groom and the bride don't even see each other. The parents decide the marriage, and they just get married off. It still happens, very much so. And then there is that when the parents are not involved at all, the guys decide themselves and screw everybody else. So it's like it's two extremes. A middle ground is needed because there are a lot of people coming together, lot of emotions coming together. The reasons for getting married, is there a courtship period? So are people getting to know each other? This usually happens in the arranged marriage thing. I'm talking about the arranged marriage, which is very prevalent in India. So yeah, it is flawed and it needs to evolve. Sort of a balance needs to be struck somewhere rather than going off in an extreme either on this side or that. That's what I feel.
But Darshan, who will need to strike the balance? You, me, the society, our parents, who will come to the need to set the
Well,
middle?
yeah, I know it's a difficult question to answer, because balance is always struck by both the parties. It's not a one-sided thing. So everybody has to come on a mature level playing field out here. It
Right.
can't be a rebel about one versus the other. So I
Mm.
mean, there's something called, there's somebody who says that I don't believe in the institution of arranged marriage at all, which again is equally an extremist view to have. Or saying that, why don't you get all involved? It's about companionship, it's about love, spending your lives together. It's a lot of things. So everybody has to do it.
Set the balance.
Everybody has to come to, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Darshan. Tawfiq, yourself?
Sure, Chris. Well, firstly, the question that you've asked, at least most married men in this panel who are attending from home would probably look over the shoulder before answering as well. Because no matter how expressive we have to be household correct, if I may put it that way. But that said, see, I come from that opinion that humans in general, right, are emotional beings who try to justify their actions through rationality,
Okay.
right? Um, End of the day, there is no logic in the institution of marriage per se, any which ways. However, it still exists. So there is a social convenience and a social protection that applies to marriage as such.
Right.
When it becomes a trouble is when your social norms become so rigid that it overpowers the individual preference of a marriage or a union of a marriage, and vis-a-vis which you start making a marriage as a bond, or it becomes a let's until death do us apart. These expectations that are set around marriage makes it even more difficult. But then on the other hand, when you make a relationship purely contractual, it lacks the emotional strength that is required for any relationship to build, right? Even in corporates, and I'm using corporates as an example because they are devoid of emotions most of the time. Till date, there is no business who can claim that we can build a business without relationships. Relationships still matter a hell lot more than today, and today as compared to it even mattered before, because
Right.
there's so much digitization around here. So emotions voided any relationship is bound to basically either see its own death, or at the same time will never even see the light of day. However, to dictate norms which precedes the contextual situation of a particular relationship, that is where I feel the institution of marriage becomes a matter of inconvenience and, as a matter of fact, insecurity for the very people that it was created.
Right.
Because if a woman gets, and I can see that question popping up on you, marriage is created in terms of a woman's social security. But then if the same institute of marriage becomes a one-way entry to a world where there is no exit, then it becomes a tool of oppression. And that is where I feel the growing precedence that we see these days, where the parents are making their daughters more financially independent, because financial abuse is one of the biggest tools that
Right.
are used in strong arming a woman into a marriage. So that is the part that could probably see a little bit of progress in the future. It is just the starting point. It is nowhere perfect. End of the day, after financial independence, one of the biggest hurdles as women in general, I feel that, yeah, the women folk would have to go into is starting the habit of leadership at an early age, and not trying to evolve into a leader after not being a leader or knowing what leadership is until their teenage itself. You shouldn't be forced into leadership. And as boys growing up, leadership almost becomes a norm, because
Yes.
we are very hierarchical in our approach any which way. So apart from that leadership exposure and financial independence exposure, which is a long-term game, and over a period of time we have to evolve socially and globally on that. At this point of time, I do find that the institute of marriage, and thanks to the laws wherever they are certainly helping in not letting the social dictates of what marriage is become what they need to become. So yeah, I do find that socially, the social expectations of a marriage and the institute of marriage is flawed, thankfully there are still laws to protect, if not on all cases, especially not in the case that we're gathered here for today, but there is certain level of protection there.
Logic, Tawfiq, I'm going to pick you on something you mentioned, that the logic behind the institution of marriage. I have been told the logic behind the institution of marriage is responsible procreation. You extend your family. Is it true?
I think what we're confusing there is the logical reason of reproduction as compared to the logical reason of marriage. You can reproduce without marriage as well, and there is no science stopping you for that.
No, but are we accepting of that in our societies?
We're not. And which is why I said that the social convenience and the social tools that are used to kind of create that protection around the offspring, for that matter, is also protected. And I go back to that term which says that it takes a village to raise a child, and that comes from the fact that just a human being, just two individuals are not entirely competent all the time to raise a responsible citizen. It takes a tribe.
Right. Thanks, Tawfiq. Siddiq, I'll come to you. Do you think that the institution of marriage in the South Asian setup is flawed?
Yeah, interesting question. I would go a little bit further than the flawed.
Okay.
I say it's a morally corrupt institution.
Right.
I'm sorry to say, many people don't agree, many people don't like. But let us see the context. How long we are in this marriage institution? Go back to 3,000 years. I think the religion was the main cause who monitor and decide the relation between man and woman. Before the advent of religion, there was no marriage institution as such. So this institution is 3,000 years or a little bit more old institution. With the advent of governance system and industrial revolution and nation states, law and order machinery came into existence. And they have more influence on all the institutions which affect our day-to-day life.
Right.
So marriage institute is one of that institution. Now with time pass, we have to normally law evolve, and it goes with the societal change and societal norms. Unfortunately, we are still stuck marriage institution with religion, and religion is the dominant figure. Then culture is the second, society is third. The biggest problem with the marriage institution is religion. This couple made in the heaven. I don't know which heaven we are talking. We are suffering here in the hell, and we are talking about heaven. So it's so in my opinion, marriage institution needs a lot of change.
Yes.
It should go with the time. I understand it's evolving. In the Western world, in Australia, now it's a bit more liberal society, more freedom.
Yes.
Less domination by the society and the governance.
Right.
Now there are de facto relationship. Now there are choices. People can live in relationship. Unfortunately, we Indian subcontinent are one of the hypocrite society on earth. We do not accept the reality. We see our society is crumbling. Our value is not relevant. We see in our naked eyes, but we do not accept.
Right.
We always try to protect under the societal norms, our religions, our culture. Good luck. Time is not going to wait any of us.
Yes.
We have to go along with the time.
Yeah.
Yes, we need to change the law. We need to change. We need to move according to the time. And I think Western world is leading in that direction. We do not like this, that the Western world is better than us. But we like it or not, marriage institution need change, need fairness, need flexibility, need less family interference, and need to be decided between two parties. Whether it is male or female or any gender, I don't mind. It's individual choices. So I would focus more on individual liberty and freedom than this rigid form of religious and social control.
But Siddiq, I'll be the devil's advocate for 1 second. I see a lot of people saying, oh, since the Western world has this individualistic concept of marriage, that's why the divorce rates are higher than the subcontinent, right? What is your take on that?
Yes, this is another myth which direction we are going. I understand, yes, there are more divorce because the data is available. This system is working.
Yeah.
Our country system is not working. Data not available. We are hiding a lot of things. We are keeping everything under carpet. We don't accept the reality.
Okay.
Accept the reality and see what happened in our society, and we'll see the real picture.
Thank you. Thank you, Siddiq. Sumeher, your final words on this issue.
So I would say, on a lighter note, marriage is great till laws get invoked. Till we have to get into the legal system. Till then, marriage is a great concept. It is ultimately procreation. We've all given you amazing answers on how we see marriage, and everybody's marriage is different. And I liked how Tawfiq had to look behind, and that's the smart way to do it. So what I have to really add to over here is that, as Siddiq said, and very correctly, I think it should be more contractual. Religion has to play a smaller role. We still talk about a Hindu marriage, like I said, being sacred. A Muslim marriage also has its own customs. It has to be now different systems of marriage should be put in place. And a bride and a groom should ultimately, and it is for procreation, having a family, a certain norm so that the child is protected. That's what marriage should be. Why do we want to have so much governance? Ultimately, a world with minimal state interference makes best business. Same way, a marriage should have very little intervention from laws and should have a lot of support groups and so that people can adapt. So what I would say is, with time, what we should be doing is sort of have different forms of marriage and systems of marriage, even if we don't want to open them up contractually and say prenups are not allowed in Hindu marriage because that will take legislative action. What we should do is we should have a set template. If a bride and a groom want to, let's say, adapt and sort of a marriage which says this is a marriage where no financial burdens on each other for times to come, and sure, then one could be a little stricter, saying monogamy, and that's how we want to keep it. Fair enough. Another couple might say, and like Siddiq said, it should be gender neutral, gender open, gender acceptable. In today's world, only a man and woman being covered for marriage, and at least in India, what has been rejected right now is amendments to the acts which allow for same-sex relationships and the various LGBTQAI people being covered under marriage. So a relook is needed. It's almost archaic. Times have changed, and a marriage also has to follow certain systems where people can contract into those systems, and state legislation should be minimized on it. That's how I see it.
But Sumeher, again, being the devil's advocate here, for example, one of my friends, he or she or they have a grandparent who is sick, and they are forcing the child that please get married to Chris, for example. I want to see you married. I want you to get married to her. This will be my final wish. Can't you do that? All of that. What is that person supposed to do in that situation?
Look, firstly, a person should not be bullied into doing anything that they don't want to willingly do. Sooner or later, that thing is going to fade out. Like if you're only getting married for a dying wish of a relative, however close that person may be, it's going to be forced upon you. The chances of it working are very low. When you would have in a marriage, you're going to have fights. In a marriage, you're going to have controversies,
How do you
questions.
say no to your ill grandparent?
You basically, if you're not in love with that person, or the person you're supposed to, if the ill grandparent is asking you to do something which you would eventually do, in any case, that you're dating someone or you're going to be with someone, then I think it is okay to do a little ceremony and make them happy. It's not about the marriage. It could be anything at that stage. But if you're not looking to get married and it's being forced, that I think anybody, even God asks you for that. If you have a God in mind like that, then I think you have the right to say no. It should be consent, and it should be something that should come from within you. You don't want to make decisions that you have an argument
Right.
and then you say, hey, this is not what I wanted. Look at the psychological impact it's going to have if you tomorrow do something that you've been forced to do. And I think a dying parent or a dying grandparent telling you something is going to psychologically mess you up. So I think I would definitely say that the family has to gather around that person and explain what's possible and what's not possible.
Thank you. Thank you. I really wish that becomes possible in the next sooner foreseeable future, because we all know how influences like these sometimes crop up and become the main reason why marriages get affected. But what I've been hearing from this question is that, marriages are not contractual, they should be made contractual. But I was doing a bit of my reading where it said that there's no prenuptial law, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sumeher, that India does not allow for a prenup, yeah? Because it just kind of nullifies the whole fabric on which Indian marriages are based. Now, this is a question that I want to put all of you, and probably I'll come last to Sumeher and Sadiq so they can put the lawyer's hat to this question. But the question I have for everyone is, I have been a staunch advocate of a prenuptial agreement, and I have been rejected a few times based on that, because back then the man was not ready to have this conversation. The parents said, oh, you're already talking about getting a divorce even before you want to start a family. But now I'm seeing men advocating for prenuptial laws in India. Now, the question to the panel is, why should we have a prenup or should not we have a prenuptial? That kind of goes for both the parties. Darshan, I'll start with you.
Okay, I think one thing we have to cover is that Indian society is not ready for prenups at the moment, because even most of the contracts are done on the word of mouth and exit clauses. Prenup is sort of an exit clause. So an exit clauses are frowned upon. It's like you're looking at the end before you even start. So this is a very tricky thing. Having said that, personally, I feel that prenups are very important. We need to mature as a society to allow prenups to happen, and getting a legal perspective, a legal sanction on it, making it legitimate is of course important. But as a society, we have to prepare for any eventuality which might happen. And there's nothing better than a prenup that covers it.
Right.
So I would be with you on this, and I would also imagine getting rejected because of being asked for a prenup, because the society has not matured enough.
Sad but true, but yeah. Nadeem, I'll come to you. What are your thoughts? Should in a South Asian setting, in India specifically, in Australia obviously laws are different, should we have prenuptial agreement?
Well, I believe the decision to have a prenup agreement before marriage, it's actually a personal one. Not, it can't be, we can't say whether it happens in South Asia or not. It's a very personal decision, because again, my perspective that, marriage is about the partnership. It's about, as I said, it's a trust, mutual respect.
Yes.
And before you consider a prenup, it is important that both partners have a open and honest conversation. Just now recently we said, and sometime, if you just bring the prenup at the start of the marriage, the marriage won't even go ahead in some of the cases.
When is a good time to talk about the prenuptial agreement, Nadeem, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it's after you create that bond, because when you create a bond, because in arranged marriage, it will be very, very hard, because it's your family is making the decision.
Right.
Because how do I put it? Because marriage is not just a contract. It's an emotional, spiritual, and a personal commitment. It actually, and if you start talking about the prenup contract before you even have any emotional connection with the person, most of the time it will just break up. It won't even go that further that the person is talking about. The emotional aspect of a marriage hold a very deep significance, and only after that, if you want to talk about the prenup, only after that you talk about the prenup. It's because it's very important that both partners in a marriage approach this concept of prenup with the respect for one other feeling and concerns, because
Right.
when this person will talk about prenup, it is very important that how you address those concerns in a very open way by having an open communication. Both
Right.
individuals should feel that they have been heard and they have been valued. And any decision you make on the prenup, it has to be on mutual consent, not that this is what I want, this is what I want.
Right.
Again, as I said, it's a journey. So it can't be, you can't just put the condition on a relationship before you even started the relationship.
Right. Thanks, Nadeem.
Whether to have a prenup or not, it's again decision made by the both partners in a spirit of love, respect, and shared understanding.
Thanks, Nadeem. Tawfiq, I'll come to you and I'll add something onto the question is, what happened to Atul, right? Do you reckon that this might not have been the situation had they already had signed a prenuptial in the beginning?
Um, if there was a prenup, and I think maybe Sadiq bhai might be in a better position to talk about where prenups or financial arrangements actually fail despite of having one. So, is there a right or wrong answer to it, or definite answer to it? I don't know. So, but yes, I mean, based on how much I understand, it would. And bringing it back to, and I understand that we were in that format where we discussed that we shouldn't be talking religion, but in my religion or my tradition that I come from, I cannot have a marriage without a prenup, and that is a norm for me to have a prenup before we get into marriage.
Right.
But that said, because we are an apparent predominant patriarchy, men will always find way to find abusive loopholes around it.
Yeah.
Sorry. I won't get into the details of that because I think that ties up into the next question that you're going to ask about abuse of law, any which ways. But what I will address though is in that part that you said, when should the prenup happen, right? Um, as Nadeem rightly said, there's no right time for it. But what I can say is that there is a time before it's too late. And that time is before you propose, you should have a prenup. But if you do get caught in that situation where you do want to say yes, I think that is the immediate first conversation you should have after yes. Or if you're too technical about it, the moment you say yes, conditions apply. But but yes, that is, you shouldn't be delaying it any further than that is what I would add it onto it.
Thanks, Tawfiq. Now I'll come to the lawyers on the panel. Sumeher, your thoughts on a bit more legal thoughts on why don't we have a prenuptial situation in India?
So I'm going to put this as straight as possible, that the fact that we don't have prenups in India tells me how relevant they are and why they should actually exist. Now, what we do here are MOUs, which is basically only very high net individuals can come up to a lawyer and say, oh, look, these are my assets and this is how I want to take care of my children. Let's at least document and record it, because tomorrow if something goes wrong, I can remind her, and vice versa, I can remind him.
Right.
So these are non-enforceable MOUs that parties get into. In Goa, however, because Portuguese civil code applies, you can have a prenup over there, which is enforceable. But Goa, enforcing it in Goa in a court, a local court, has its own challenges. So firstly, not having this sort of a branch which can save so much pain to, like Nadeem said, consenting parties should be able to do this. Like Tawfiq is also explaining his version. So when consenting parties are clear in their head, the law must aid them. Having a prenup should be good. Then I also think, and I'm not going to answer this in a long-winded way, I also think there has to be a way for systemic, for parties to have certain systems in place. Like, for example, we have 5 generic system-based prenup areas, where templates are used.
Yeah.
And we say, this was a spiritual marriage, or let's say this was a contractual marriage.
Yeah.
And this is how we want to divide things. So they're aided and they're guided. I think it's time that I don't know how it works in Australia, so they can put some more light in that. There should be certain organizations which should be able to, like marriage counselors, they should guide people on a contractual marriage. And again, like Siddiq said, and I totally agree, religious interference in marriages should be minimal now.
Yeah.
That should just be to your spirit. It should be a ceremony. And what Nadeem said vis-a-vis, the emotions and how marriage is looked at. I don't think it's going to last if it's basically just a contract. So we have to say that while the ceremonies are all spiritual or religious, but of course the contract dictates, like good fences make good neighbors. A good prenup is going to help parties come to some sort of a solution. I have seen a lot of lopsided things happen where a multi-billionaire wants to now marry somebody who's young, still making it. Why those marriages don't become successful at point go is because this conversation of prenup itself is a difficult one.
Yeah.
So I think as there are family counselors and marriage counselors now, and in India counseling is becoming a little better, there should also be counseling before marriage, if that's possible.
Thank you, Sumeher. Siddiq, I'll come to you on your legal views on prenups in India specifically, and how does it work in Australia?
Yeah, prenup is very common in Australia. Under Family Law Act, there is a provision, and normally it's prepared by the lawyers and safeguard your financial, your property or finance or your child arrangement. If you can put it on piece of paper before your marriage, it does help. It's a lot of cost,
Right.
a lot of stress, and it make life a bit easier. So because it's a first world country and a well-developed system, it's common. Unfortunately, the reality for subcontinent people are a bit different, because subcontinent people have a lot of prejudice regarding prenup. First of all, the family will involve that prenup means you want to divorce. That's why you are interested in prenup. No, this is not the good starting point. And then when you prepare the relevant provision that, oh, this guy has so much property, he wants to protect, or he has this property, he has kids. No. So before I have seen few instances where even the negotiation break down just because of the prenup, because they forget that they are going to be together. Instead, they are now fighting for, oh, this resources this guy has, these kids. So there are some practical issues affecting Indian subcontinent couples. As usual, family, religion, society, and the individual prejudice, this affect, but it's very common in Australia to have prenup. It's not that expensive. And yes, many people prefer, and it does help, and it's really working.
Right. Thank you. Since we're talking about the legal aspects and marriage and contracts, so my next question is a very straight and a simple one. Should these laws be then made gender neutral to benefit one and all in the society? This time I'm going to start with Nadeem. Nadeem, you're unmuted. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, what was the question?
The question is, should these laws be made gender neutral so that it's fair and square to everyone?
Oh, absolutely. It has to be, because again, this is a very, very sensitive topic. When you ever pick, and it is very, very important that we approach it with a lot of balance. And there has been a lot of cases where the law has been misused. There is a lot. I mean, if you search on the internet, you will find numerous cases where it has been misused, where it has been very unfair and damaging for the other party. So, but at the same time, we must remember why these laws were created at the first place, to protect those who were genuinely vulnerable. That was the reason these laws were started. But then, as we gradually move into a society where people started misusing it, so that's why the policy makers, the government needs to actually work together hand in hand to come with a gender neutral approach that could be fair, if we are doing the investigation and the consequences. Cons the other thing is that it is very important to have a clause for false accusations as well. So what is done to the people who are doing the false accusation? Because the whole goal should be that we have a fair approach,
Yes,
and the justice is served, and ensuring both men and women are
right.
protected and heard.
Thanks, Nadeem.
Yes, Supriya.
Thanks. Darshan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a moot point, isn't it? Should laws be gender neutral? Yes. What would be the reason to not have gender neutral laws? So probably no, at one point of time, nobody thought that a man could get raped. Now you know, add it. Laws have to keep on evolving. When the laws were made at whatever point of time, that was because of the society at that point of time. Society evolves the laws. It's as simple as that. So there are absolutely no questions about whether it should be gender neutral or not. Are the crimes gender neutral? Yes, they are, right? So but I do not really wish that, what Nadeem said about the false cases. That's a bit tricky part, because every crime which is not proved does not mean it did not happen, does not make the case false. Punishing the people for making a so-called false case
Yeah.
would actually deter the women from going ahead with a rightful case. So, there's some brainstorming required from the legal fraternity on how the loopholes can be closed and how a more, level playing field can be brought in. That is what is important. But as far as gender neutrality is concerned, there is no doubt there.
No
It has
doubt.
to be gender neutral. Yeah.
Uh, Sorry, I would like to add something here.
Sure.
Well, I'm not a legal person, so I did not mean the false accusation. Because if you look at the false accusation, I actually meant that there has to be done something that, people are the not the genuine people are deterring. I mean, the people who know if they make a false accusation or falsely do something, which is of course proven, then they have to face some consequences. That's what I'm not a legal person, so this is just an observation.
No, that's all good. All good, understandable. Tawfiq, your thoughts on
Great,
gender
yeah.
neutral laws?
Hey, gender neutral laws sound like a fantastic idea and a blanket solution to everything, right? Um, I do want to kind of just peel a couple of layers on that one, though, however, right? When it comes to civil laws, and Sribai might be able to attest this for me, Australia is gender neutral on civil laws, especially around when it comes to marriages and child custodies and things like that. Does this still get applied when it comes to justice being served? And that is a question because the social norms do take a precedence, unfortunately, sometimes over a very clear law as well. And that is where I feel the lawyers would want to comment on that is when it comes to the institution of a family, a child is considered as the vulnerable point. So automatically everything goes into protecting the child first before there. But then different societies, different nations, different states might define the vulnerable differently to what one society does, which is where we may want to again look into a little bit of a caution there uh, before celebrating the idea of gender neutral laws. As much as I'm all for it, I'm also saying that with a word of caution of seeing what the sensitivity of that nation or the people that you're creating those laws for is. I'll let the lawyers comment on a more technical terms on.
Yes, I'll go on to the lawyers now. Siddiq, your thoughts?
Yeah, Tawfiq raised very good question. Gender neutral law will serve the justice. That's the issue. So the first part is gender neutral. I think whole panel agree that yes, gender neutral law is beneficial to the society. Yes, if it is based on equality, based on proportionate punishment, based on looking to the ground reality and societal norms, yes, it's good concept. But the real issue arises how you are implementing this law. That's the real crux.
Right.
That's the real issue, and that will whether it serves justice or not in Australia. Yes, we have almost gender neutral laws. So what is the stumbling block? The real issue is the implementing machinery. who are implementing this law. The front is the police. Police is the entry point in any legal, any criminality or family law issues. So when police deal with these people, police understand the situation. That's what Nadim said, false accusation is very common. In Australia, misuse of law is very common. Domestic violence laws, yes, it is misused. It is misused to get the permanent residency. There are plenty of examples available. It's very complex for Indian subcontinent people, because if you claim domestic violence, you will get permanent residency. And I can give you example and even with my personal experiences. So the gender neutral law is fine, is good concept, but the reality is ultimately it lies to the police and other machinery, judiciary. Judiciary are not sensitive enough. They have no idea what Indian subcontinent people culture are. And I have seen example of Indian international student. Trivial issues become domestic violence. And if you are charged with domestic violence, if you are convicted, you're going to lose your student visa. Finish. What kind of equality you are talking? What kind of violence you are talking? What is important? Permanent residency or the relationship? I'm raising big issues. It's not easy to answer. And how we can balance these issues.
Right.
So for gender neutral law, the concept is very good, but ultimately it lies with the implementing machinery.
Thank you, Sadiq. Very well points raised. Sadiq, Sumeher, I would like to kind of summarize that.
So my position, as I've been saying, gender neutral and gender inclusive laws. That is something that we need. The legislature here is obviously slow to adapt. Right now, we have so much to do because it'll go to the teeth of the CPC, which is the Civil Procedure Court. It'll go to the CRPC. But just implementation, like for example, I'll give you a very simple example.
Sure.
The Domestic Violence Act, like I pointed earlier, defines a woman who a victim is, and a woman can go and file a domestic violence case. Now a man had absolutely no right whatsoever to go and file for domestic violence, which is such an inequality. That certain precedents came from the Karnataka High Court and the Delhi High Court. As of 2018, if I'm correct, it was found that the DV Act is only for women, while certain courts were opening it up and looking at the Constitution of India and saying equality before law. So the difficulty that we really have is that I'm not saying things can become gender neutral in day one. I'm saying at least applicable of existing laws should also give men rights in them to come to a court and say, for example, domestic violence has happened to me. Same with alimony, maintenance under the DV Act or 125 of the CRPC. It should be any person rather than any woman. So that's the simple basic. Now, and I think that should be done. It's easy to implement and easily should be done. Over time, other legislation should happen. Also, I feel there has to be sort of economic strata. Like we know there is reservation in India for backward classes and other backward classes, and for ultimately people who are from a income strata which is very low. So we're talking about rural areas and we're talking about tier 3 cities. For them, there should be stronger protections for women. After families hit income strata, which is a little higher, then I think at the time of marriage, the definition should come from at the time of marriage. What should happen is that at that time, more contract-based and gender-neutral law should be applied.
Right.
So how this distinction happens, jurisprudence will take a long, long time. Court should use their will and open up basis the Constitution. It's amazing. The Indian Constitution is an amazing document. It actually, once enforced properly, will allow for everything to be equitable and equal. So that the principles of the Constitution being applied, like they were in a few cases, should allow men to have the same remedies as women, at least that, starting at that. The rest can all follow.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very, very mindful of the time. So the last two questions, apologies, it's kind of becoming 2 hours now, but last two questions, I would please request you all to kind of give me 2-liner answers. The first question for the panel is, what makes it difficult for the men to open up? I'll start with Darshan.
Two lines you said, one word, patriarchy. Patriarchy defines men in a certain perspective. They've got, they are the providers.
Mm-hmm.
They are the people who can't cry, can't get emotional, can't share stuff with their friends, and basically make up for a, sort of a broken down emotional state of mind, which refuses or is not allowed to seek any sort of assistance from the society, from the peers, from anybody. It gets, and basically gets laughed off if
Right.
he does seek any. So patriarchy, that is specifically what I would go for.
Thank you, Darshan. Tawfiq.
Right. Let's start with the start. In Australia, 1 out of 2 men suffer from mental health, right? And the reason, I think the precursor of that, Darshan already cleared, because patriarchy, right? Now, what is the recourse of a man in that case? Law aside, now I'm talking society. If he goes to a man as another man, apart from being ridiculed, even the person with the best of the intent has only 2 options. Chal daru pete hain, chal fook lete hain. Right? Apart from that, we don't have any other tools to give. We're like, what the hell? How do I maintain with this? We are not emotionally expressive people. What happens if he goes to a female who is not related to? Adultery. Even if it was just a matter of expressing themselves, because like, okay, some other woman might understand me. What happens if they go back to the mother or the sister? The classic word that we have in our society is kalesh. So what are the recourses left then? I'll leave that as a question to the panel and the people who are listening to this.
Thank you. Sumer, over to you.
Just 2 lines. I think it's time to open up. People are just very scared. It's better than being scared. Take action. Let it be a little calculated. If you open up, you will just fast forward time. That's all you do. Whatever has to happen is anyway going to happen. So it's for men to really woman up or man up. I don't know what the word is, but it's for them to really come out and become fearless and come out there and be honest and help yourself mentally with so many tools that are available now. I mean, at least to people like us sitting here and your audience, mostly whoever gets to hear this, I am certain they'll find tools if they look for them.
Right. Thanks, Sumer. Nadeem, what are your views? What makes it difficult for men folk to open up?
Well, I completely agree with, I think most of the 3 speakers have already covered it. Sumeher have covered it. One of the reasons they are difficult is because they are taught to be provider, protector, and problem solvers. So if they do it, other people will think they are failing. I think it is very crucial to create a boundaries and encourage very open and honest communication between not just the partners, but with the external stakeholders as well.
Right.
It is very important that you open up, you talk about it, not just like having a sutta and dal.
Right. Thanks, Nadeem. And finally, Siddiq.
First, I would say it's a stigma attached as a male. If I have issue in my marital life and I'm going through difficult time, it's very difficult to speak out with my family, with my friends, and even the society in general. Because how mostly people judge and how people judge me, that's the biggest stumbling block.
Right.
And the second, even if I crystallize the issue, yes, I'm suffering, I'm in trouble, I need some help. Where should I go? That's another issue. And I might go to a person which may be not helpful. Or if I go seek any assistance, the government or social organization, there are plenty of social organizations available, groups available. Now it's internet, a lot of information available. Unfortunately, because I am stigmatized, I am not able to access those information or support available. That hinder my progress.
Thanks, Siddiq. And I think, although I'm just a facilitator here, but I have to speak up at this point that as women who are partners or sisters, I think it's our role as well, our responsibility to let the men in our lives open up. I've heard so many times from men that, oh my God, I can't cry. What if she leaves me just because she's seen me crying, just because she's seen me as this weak person? So as women, I think we have to be there for the men in our lives. It's okay if they are crying, if they're vulnerable. It's okay, they're humans. It's just emotions. We're all made of emotions. So I just wanted to put it out there. And one last question for my panel is, this has to be one line so that we can wrap it up. What would be your message to our listeners in the light of whatever has happened, and so that no more cases come up like this? This time I'll start with Sumeher.
Just a simple thing that, we feel very isolated and lonely. And when we feel isolated and lonely, we don't realize that there is a tomorrow or there's another moment. It's good to take a little pause, take a little break, and at that, seek support, seek help, and remember the good things that you've done. Remember the fond memories. Like, for example, Atul here committed suicide because he couldn't meet his son. Just think what's going to happen to the son when the son grows up. If Atul met him even at 18, it's Atul's journey. Atul basically said, hey, listen, I'm not going to get to see my son anyway. Let's end it. Apart from, I'm not trivializing his death. I'm just saying, but if he thought that at 18, my son may still seek me out, he didn't give life a chance. So I think it's important to know that life gets better. Our emotions at that moment are not final. Emotions come, emotions go, thoughts come, thoughts go. Seek support and simply have faith. Somewhere or the other, like, there is a very interesting, I forget the person's name. I think we should all read this article by this person who wrote an open letter to Atul after he committed suicide. After the 12-year battle, while he empathized with him, his lines were, have faith, justice will be delivered. It may be delayed, but it will be delivered. So I have faith in that.
Thank you, Sumeher. Nadeem, your final thoughts and message.
It's one-liner. So I would say, live life. Remember, you're not alone. You seek help, talk to someone you trust. Remember, the vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a strength.
Right. Beautiful. Thank you, Nadeem. Siddiq, your one-liner message, as I like to put it.
World is beautiful. Life is to live, not to ruin.
Right.
Have faith in yourself. If you have bad experience with one or two people, even close one, that's not end of the world. World is beautiful. Go out, meet friends, meet people, meet unknown people, seek help, and life will change.
Beautiful, Siddiq. Thank you. Darshan.
Do not make this about men versus women. Make this about oppressor versus the victim, irrespective of the genders. Come together, fight together, smash patriarchy.
Beautiful. Thank you, Darshan. And finally, Tawfiq.
जिंदगी को उतनी ही शिद्दत से चाहो जितनी तुम अपनी कामयाबी को चाहते हो. Pursue your avenues of help as badly as you've chased success in your life.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. On that note, this was way longer than I expected it to be. That apologies again. I've taken literally 2 hours out of your time, but this had to be done. This conversation had to be had because we've lost lives. We might know how many are still thinking about ending their lives, so we don't want that to occur in the future. For our viewers, this conversation might be a little distressing because we've spoken about suicide, we've spoken about suicidal thoughts. So if at any point of this conversation you feel like stepping out and taking care of your mental health, please feel free to do so, because this was a heavy conversation, but a relevant one. On that note, thank you everyone for joining me on this panel, and I hope we can only hope for a better and brighter future. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice meeting all of you.
Likewise.